My name is Glinda, and I'm 57 years old. I was sitting in my kitchen this morning, holding my phone with trembling hands, staring at a text message that shattered my heart into a million pieces. Just 2 hours earlier, I had transferred $20,000 to help my son Marcus buy his first house. $20,000 that represented years of sacrifice, late nights working overtime, and dreams of finally sharing something special together. The text read, "You're not coming. I don't want you on my trip." Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could, especially after everything I had given him. Before we dive into this story that changed everything between my son and me, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt taken for granted by someone you love, and don't forget to subscribe, because what I did next completely turned the tables and left my son absolutely speechless. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand just how deep this betrayal cut. 10 years ago, when Marcus was just 13, his father walked out on us without so much as a goodbye note. Left me with a pile of bills, a broken heart, and a confused teenager who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I made a promise that night, crying into my pillow while Marcus slept, that I would be everything he needed. Mother, father, provider, protector. Whatever it took. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. During the day, I sold real estate for Patterson and Associates, and 3 nights a week, I waited tables at Giuseppe's Italian restaurant downtown. I remember countless nights when Marcus would do his homework at a corner table while I served customers, his textbooks spread between the salt and pepper shakers. The other servers thought I was crazy bringing my kid to work, but I couldn't afford a babysitter and refused to leave him home alone. There were so many sacrifices those early years. I'd skip lunch to buy Marcus new soccer cleats when his feet outgrew the old ones. I drove a car with 200,000 miles on it because every extra dollar went toward his college fund. When he wanted to go to soccer camp the summer he turned 15, I worked double shifts for 3 months straight, coming home with aching feet and a smile on my face because I could give him that opportunity. Marcus wasn't always the entitled young man he became. As a child, he was thoughtful and grateful. When I'd come home exhausted from my second job, he'd have a sandwich waiting for me, usually peanut butter and jelly, because that's all he knew how to make. He'd rub my shoulders and tell me I was the best mom in the world. Those moments made every sacrifice worth it. By the time Marcus graduated high school, I had managed to build a successful real estate career. The restaurant job was behind me, and I finally had some financial stability. I bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Marcus had his own room, a place to bring friends, and for the first time in years, I could breathe a little easier. When Marcus started college at State University, studying business administration, I was so proud, I cried at his orientation. Here was my boy, the first in our family to go to college pursuing his dreams. I paid his tuition, bought his textbooks, and sent care packages filled with his favorite snacks. Every semester I'd drive the 3 hours to campus just to take him to dinner and make sure he was doing okay. During his junior year, Marcus mentioned wanting to travel to Europe after graduation. He'd talk about seeing the Eiffel Tower, exploring the museums in Rome, maybe taking a cooking class in Tuscany. As he spoke, his eyes would light up with the same wonder I remembered from his childhood. That's when the idea started forming in my mind. What if we could take that trip together? A graduation gift, a celebration of all we'd accomplished, a chance to make memories that would last forever. I started researching European tours, calculating costs, setting aside extra money each month. I imagined us walking through the Louvre, sharing gelato in a sidewalk cafe in Florence, laughing together as we got lost in the winding streets of Prague. For 2 years, I held on to that dream, never mentioning it to Marcus, because I wanted it to be a surprise. When Marcus graduated last spring with his business degree, I was bursting with pride and excitement. The ceremony was beautiful, and watching him walk across that stage made every sleepless night and every sacrifice feel worth it. Afterward at dinner, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone. When I asked about his job search, he just shrugged and said the market was tough for new graduates. I could see the stress weighing on him. Student loan payments would start soon, and despite his degree, entry-level positions weren't paying much. That's when my maternal instincts kicked in again. I wanted to help him get established, give him a foundation to build on. I never imagined that foundation would become the very thing he'd use to push me away. 3 weeks after graduation, Marcus called me, and for the first time in months, I heard genuine excitement in his voice. He'd found a house, he said, a perfect starter home in the trendy downtown district. It was a 2-bedroom craftsman-style bungalow with original hardwood floors and a small backyard. The asking price was $89,000, which he said was a steal in that neighborhood. As he described the house, I could hear him walking through it, his footsteps echoing in what I assumed were empty rooms. "Mom, you should see this kitchen. It has this beautiful farmhouse sink and subway tile backsplash. The previous owners took really good care of it. It just needs some minor updates, maybe new light fixtures and fresh paint." My heart swelled listening to him talk about his future home. This was my baby, my boy, ready to take on the world and build a life for himself. When he paused, I could sense something was wrong. "What is it, honey?" I asked gently. "Well, there's just one problem," he said, his voice dropping. "I don't have enough for the down payment. With my student loans and everything, the bank wants $20,000 down, and I've only got about $3,000 saved up. The seller already has another offer, so if I can't move fast, I'll lose it." Without hesitation, without even thinking about it, the words tumbled out of my mouth. "I'll help you with the down payment, sweetheart. $20,000 to get you started in your own home. That's not even a question." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Marcus spoke, and his voice was different, quieter. "Mom, are you sure that's a lot of money?" "Marcus, I've been saving for years, working toward this exact moment when I could help you launch your adult life. This house sounds perfect for you. Consider it an early inheritance, an investment in your future." I was already mentally calculating which savings account to draw from how long it would take to transfer the funds. His hesitation seemed to evaporate instantly. "Oh my God, Mom, really? You'd do that for me? This is incredible. I love you so much. You're the best mother in the world." His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself grinning like a teenager. Over the next few days, we talked constantly about the house. Marcus would send me photos from his second and third walkthroughs, pointing out details like the original crown molding and the updated electrical system. I started imagining myself visiting him there, maybe helping him paint those rooms he mentioned cooking dinner in that farmhouse kitchen. But then he started mentioning Jessica. At first, it was casual. "Jessica thinks the bedroom would look great painted sage green." Then it became more frequent. "Jessica found these amazing curtains online that would be perfect for the living room." When I asked who Jessica was, Marcus seemed surprised I didn't know. "She's my girlfriend, Mom. I thought I mentioned her before. We've been dating for about 6 months." 6 months, and this was the first I was hearing about her. That stung a little, but I pushed the feeling aside. Marcus was 22, establishing his independence. It was natural he'd have relationships I didn't know about. 2 weeks before the house closing, Marcus asked if I wanted to meet Jessica. They were going to dinner at Romano's, an upscale Italian place downtown, and suggested I join them. I was thrilled at the invitation, excited to meet the woman who had captured my son's heart. Jessica was not what I expected. She was young, probably 20 or 21, with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. She carried herself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, and when Marcus introduced us, she barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, you're the mom," she said, extending a limp hand for a brief handshake. "Marcus has told me so much about you." But her tone suggested he hadn't told her anything good. Throughout dinner, Jessica dominated the conversation, talking about her sorority, her father's law practice, and the luxury apartment her parents were paying for while she figured out her career path. She ordered the most expensive items on the menu without even glancing at the prices, then barely touched her food. What bothered me most was how differently Marcus behaved around her. My thoughtful, considerate son seemed to hang on her every word, agreeing with everything she said, even when her opinions were shallow or unkind. When she made a disparaging comment about our server's accent, Marcus laughed along instead of defending the woman who was working hard to serve us. As the evening progressed, I noticed Jessica's subtle digs. When I mentioned my real estate career, she said, "Oh, how interesting. I could never do sales. I prefer more intellectual pursuits." When Marcus talked about our plans to maybe take a trip together after he got settled in the house, Jessica's expression darkened. "Actually, babe," she said, placing her hand on his arm possessively, "I was thinking we should plan something together instead. Maybe that Europe trip you mentioned. It would be so much more romantic as a couples thing, don't you think?" I watched my son's face as she spoke, saw something shift in his expression. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I guess that makes sense. Mom, we can always travel together some other time, right?" I smiled and nodded, but inside, something cold settled in my stomach. This girl, this entitled princess, who'd known my son for 6 months, was already trying to push me out of his life. And Marcus, my Marcus, who used to tell me everything, was letting her. The warning signs were all there, flashing like neon lights in the darkness. But I was so focused on helping my son succeed, so proud of his accomplishments, that I ignored every single one. I convinced myself Jessica was just young and would mature. I told myself Marcus was just trying to impress her and would find his balance. I made excuses because I couldn't bear the thought that the son I'd sacrificed everything for might choose a spoiled girl over his own mother. The morning I made the wire transfer was a Tuesday in late September. I remember because it was raining, one of those steady autumn drizzles that makes everything look gray and melancholy. I sat in my car outside First National Bank for almost 10 minutes, staring at the building where I'd done my banking for 15 years, gathering the courage to walk inside and change both our lives forever. Inside, Margaret Henderson, the bank manager I'd worked with when buying my own house, greeted me warmly. "Glinda, what brings you in today? Finally ready to upgrade to that luxury condo you've been dreaming about?" I laughed, but it felt forced. "Not quite, Margaret. I'm here to wire $20,000 to help my son buy his first house." Saying it out loud made it real, final, terrifying, and wonderful all at once. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. $20,000 was more than many people's entire savings account. "That's very generous of you, Glinda. Let me get the paperwork started." As I filled out the transfer forms, my hand shook slightly. This money represented my entire emergency fund, the safety net I'd built up over years of careful budgeting and smart investing. It was supposed to protect me if something went wrong, if I got sick, if the real estate market crashed, if life threw me one of its inevitable curveballs. But Marcus needed it more than I needed security, or so I told myself. The amount seemed so much larger, written in numbers on the form. 20,000 cents, going from my savings to Marcus's account at his bank across town. Margaret processed everything efficiently, but I could see concern in her eyes. "Glinda, I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but you're sure about this? Once the wire goes through, it's essentially a gift. There's no legal mechanism to get it back if circumstances change." Her words hung in the air between us. "Margaret, I raised this boy by myself for 10 years. I've sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had. This house is his chance to build something real, something lasting. How could I not help him?" She nodded and completed the transaction. The receipt showed a balance in my savings account that made my stomach lurch. Suddenly, I felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't since those early days after Marcus's father left. But I pushed the feeling down. This was an investment in Marcus's future and our relationship and everything we'd built together. Walking back to my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring, but he sounded distracted, distant. "Hey, Mom, what's up? I'm kinda busy right now." "The money's been sent, honey," I said, unable to keep the pride and nervousness out of my voice. $20,000, just like we discussed. It should be in your account within the hour. There was a pause, and I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Oh, right, the house money. Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it. Listen, I've got to run. Jessica and I are looking at furniture." Furniture shopping with money I'd just sent him. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I tried to stay positive. "That sounds fun, sweetheart. Maybe I could help you pick out some things. I have pretty good taste, and I know some great discount stores where we could stretch your budget." Maybe later, Mom. Jessica has some specific ideas about what she wants. I mean, what we want for the house. You understand?" I understood more than I wanted to. "Of course, honey. Just remember it's your house. Make sure you choose things you love." "Yeah, definitely. Thanks again for the money, Mom. I've got to go." The line went dead, and I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, rain drumming on the roof, feeling strangely empty. I'd just given my son the biggest gift of his life, and he'd barely been able to stay on the phone for 2 minutes. Jessica's voice had sounded more present, more real to him than mine did. I drove home and tried to shake off the feeling of unease. Marcus was excited, busy planning his future. It was natural he'd be distracted. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table looking out at the rain, trying to recapture the joy I'd felt about helping him. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text message. I assumed it was Marcus, maybe with an update about the furniture shopping, or a thank you, now that he'd had time to process what I'd done for him. I picked up the phone with a smile, ready to bask in my son's gratitude. Instead, I found words that would replay in my mind for weeks to come. "Mom, change of plans. You're not coming on the Europe trip. I don't want you there. Jessica and I need this time alone. Thanks for understanding." I read the message 3 times before the words sank in. Then I read it again, hoping I'd misunderstood. Hoping there was some other interpretation that didn't feel like a knife between my shoulder blades. But there it was, in black and white, sent from my son's phone, 2 hours after I'd transferred $20,000 to make his dreams come true. My hands started shaking first, then the trembling spread through my whole body. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the kitchen table. I tried to call him immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. The tears came then hot and angry and heartbroken all at once. I'd never mentioned the Europe trip to Marcus directly, but he knew. Somehow, he knew. I'd been planning it, saving for it, dreaming about it. And he'd chosen this moment, this precise moment, when I'd just emptied my emergency fund for him to tell me I wasn't wanted. The cruelty of the timing wasn't accidental. It couldn't be. He'd waited until after the money was safely in his account, until I was financially and emotionally invested, until I was vulnerable. Then he'd delivered the blow that made it clear exactly where I stood in his life. I was useful when he needed something disposable when he didn't. I sat at that kitchen table until well past midnight, staring at the text message, trying to understand how the sweet boy who used to make me peanut butter sandwiches had become someone capable of such calculated coldness. The rain kept falling, and I kept crying, mourning not just the trip I'd lost, but the son I realized I'd lost somewhere along the way. 3 days passed without a word from Marcus. I sent text messages asking if we could talk, left voicemails saying I was confused and hurt by his message, even tried calling Jessica's number that I'd found in his phone contacts. Nothing. Radio silence from the son who used to call me every day when he first went to college, who used to need my advice on everything from which classes to take to how to ask a girl on a date. By Friday, I couldn't stand being in the house anymore. I drove to Marcus's apartment complex, a newer development about 20 minutes from downtown, where most of the residents were young professionals or graduate students. I'd been there twice before, once to help him move in, and once to bring him soup when he had the flu. Both times, he'd seemed happy to see me. Jessica's car was parked in Marcus's assigned space, a silver BMW that looked fresh off the lot. I recognized it from dinner at Romano's, where she'd made a point of mentioning it was a graduation gift from Daddy. Seeing it there claiming the space that should have been Marcus's felt like another small betrayal. I sat in my car for almost an hour, working up the courage to knock on his door. What would I say? How do you confront your own child about breaking your heart? How do you demand respect from someone you've taught to take your love for granted? As I was debating whether to leave, Mrs. Patterson from Unit 3B walked by with her small dog. She recognized me from my previous visits and stopped to chat through my car window. "Oh, Glenda, how nice to see you. You must be so proud of Marcus. He's been telling everyone about his trust fund paying for that beautiful house he bought. Such a lucky young man to have that kind of family wealth behind him." Trust fund. The words hit me like a physical blow. I managed to smile and nod appropriately until Mrs. Patterson continued her walk. But inside, I was reeling. Marcus was telling people he had a trust fund. He was taking credit for my sacrifice, making it sound like he came from money, like his success was inevitable rather than hard-won. The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal. Not only had he cut me out of his life after I'd given him everything, he was actively erasing my contribution from the story. In his version, he was a privileged young man with family money, not the son of a single mother who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college. I drove home in a daze and did something I'd never done before. I looked up Marcus on social media. I'd never been much for Facebook or Instagram, preferring real conversation to digital updates, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Marcus's Facebook page was a revelation and a horror show. Photos of him and Jessica at expensive restaurants, her showing off what looked like a new designer handbag in every picture. There were posts about house hunting with my beautiful girlfriend and so grateful for all my blessings. Not one mention of his mother. Not one acknowledgement of where his blessings actually came from. But it was Jessica's Instagram that really made my blood boil. She'd posted a photo of herself holding keys with the caption, "Our new house, can't wait to start this next chapter." Our house. The house I'd paid for was suddenly theirs, a joint acquisition between 2 young lovers starting their lives together. I scrolled further and found posts about their upcoming Europe trip. Screenshots of flight confirmations showing first-class tickets to Paris. Photos of designer luggage with tags still attached. Restaurant reservations at what I could only assume were 5-star establishments. My $20,000 wasn't just funding a modest graduation trip. It was bankrolling a luxury vacation that cost more than I spent in 6 months. That weekend, I ran into Janet Morrison at the grocery store. Janet worked in the same office building as Marcus's new apartment complex, and we'd chatted a few times over the years. She approached me with a big smile and congratulations. "Glenda, I saw your son at Sullivan's Steakhouse last week. He was with a lovely blonde girl, and they looked so happy. He was telling the hostess it was a celebration because he'd just achieved financial independence. You must be so relieved to have raised such a successful young man." Financial independence, achieved with my money, celebrated at a restaurant where appetizers cost what I used to spend on groceries for a week. I thanked Janet for the kind words and excused myself, abandoning my shopping cart and rushing to my car before the tears could start again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed calculating exactly how much Marcus was spending on this European adventure. The first-class flights alone probably cost more than my car payment for the entire year. Add in 5-star hotels, Michelin-starred restaurants, and the shopping sprees Jessica was clearly planning, and the total was staggering. I realized with crystal clarity that my $20,000 wasn't just a down payment on a house. It was seed money for a lifestyle I'd never intended to fund. Marcus and Jessica were treating my sacrifice like a windfall, my generosity like an entitlement, my love like a resource to be exploited. The hardest part was admitting to myself that I'd enabled this behavior. Every time I'd swooped in to solve Marcus's problems, every time I'd prioritized his wants over my own needs, every time I'd made excuses for his selfishness, I'd been training him to see me exactly the way he was seeing me now. As a source of money and solutions, not as a person deserving of love and respect. Lying there in the dark, I made a decision that would change everything between us forever. I was done being Marcus's personal ATM. I was done accepting crumbs of attention in exchange for major sacrifices. I was done being the kind of mother who raised an entitled son instead of a decent man. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to know just how deep his betrayal ran, just how completely he'd written me out of his success story. Because if I was going to take a stand, I needed to be armed with the full truth about what my son had become. The week before Marcus's departure for Europe, I still hadn't heard directly from him. Not a phone call, not a text message, not even a Facebook message. It was as if I'd ceased to exist the moment his bank account reflected my $20,000 deposit. The silence was deafening and deliberate, designed to make it clear that any relationship we had was entirely on his terms. Then the mail arrived on a Thursday afternoon that changed everything forever. I was sorting through the usual bills and advertisements when I saw an elegant cream-colored envelope addressed to me in calligraphy. The return address showed Marcus's name, but not his apartment. Instead, it listed an address in the historic district downtown, the kind of neighborhood where young professionals paid premium rent for the prestige of a prestigious zip code. Inside was a wedding invitation printed on expensive cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. Jessica Marie Whitmore and Marcus James Patterson request the pleasure of your company at their wedding celebration. The date was 3 weeks away. The location was listed as following our romantic European honeymoon tour. I had to read it 3 times before the full implications sank in. This wasn't just a trip. This was an engagement trip, a European honeymoon tour, and I was finding out about my son's engagement through a formal invitation that arrived a week before he left the country. The invitation that, based on the postmark, had been mailed before he'd even told me I wasn't welcome on the trip. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to call him, but then I stopped. This invitation wasn't an oversight or a surprise announcement. It was a calculated message. Marcus wanted me to know that my money had funded not just a house and a vacation, but an engagement and honeymoon. He wanted me to understand that I'd paid for him to start a life that didn't include me. The wedding announcement included a note about gifts being unnecessary since we prefer experiences over things, and a suggestion that well-wishers could contribute to their adventure fund for future travels. Even their wedding was positioned as an opportunity for others to fund their lifestyle. I called Ruth, my closest friend since high school, and read her the invitation through tears of rage and heartbreak. Ruth had watched me raise Marcus single-handedly, had seen every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every proud moment. She knew better than anyone what this betrayal meant. "Glinda," she said after a long pause, "this boy has lost his mind. What kind of son gets engaged without telling his mother? What kind of man uses his mother's money to fund a proposal trip and then uninvites her from what she thought was a shared vacation?" "The kind I apparently raised," I said bitterly. "Ruth, I've made a monster. All those years of putting him first, of making sure he never wanted for anything, of sacrificing my own happiness for his success, and this is what I get. A formal invitation to a wedding I'm finding out about after the fact. You didn't make a monster, honey. You loved a child who chose to become entitled. There's a difference. The question now is, what are you going to do about it?" That question haunted me for the next 2 days. I walked around my house like a ghost, picking up photos of Marcus at various ages, remembering the sweet boy who used to bring me wildflowers he'd picked from the neighbor's yard. That child seemed like a stranger now, a memory that belonged to someone else's life. On Saturday morning, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to take back my power. I was going to stop being a victim of my own generosity and start being a mother who demanded the respect she deserved. I started by researching the legal implications of the money I'd transferred. I called the bank, spoke to lawyers, and discovered something interesting. While the $20,000 was legally a gift and couldn't be reclaimed, the house purchase couldn't be completed without a cosigner. Marcus's credit score and income weren't sufficient for the mortgage on his own. The bank confirmed what I suspected. Marcus had listed me as his cosigner on the mortgage application, assuming I'd rubber stamp anything he wanted after providing the down payment. In his mind, the hard part was getting the money from me. The rest was just paperwork. But he was wrong. The co-signature required my physical presence, my actual approval, my willingness to tie my financial future to his property purchase. And that signature was scheduled for Monday morning, 2 days before his Tuesday flight to Paris. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than heartbreak and rage. I felt powerful. Marcus had made a crucial error in his calculations. He'd assumed my love was unconditional and my support was guaranteed. He'd counted on me being the same pushover mother who'd always enabled his selfishness. He was about to learn that even the most patient mother has limits. And he was about to discover that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just exploitation wrapped in family obligations. Sunday night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to tell me he wanted to marry me when he grew up because I was the best woman in the world. That boy was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of entitlement and selfishness. The question was whether it was too late to save him from the man he'd become. By Monday morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. The only question was whether I had the strength to follow through. Because what I was planning would either save our relationship or destroy it completely. There would be no middle ground, no going back, no pretending things were fine when they weren't. It was time to find out what kind of man I'd really raised. And it was time to find out what kind of mother I was willing to be going forward. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I dressed carefully for my meeting at the bank, choosing a navy blue suit that made me feel professional and confident. If I was going to take a stand, I wanted to look like a woman who meant business. The appointment was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I arrived 15 minutes early. Margaret Henderson greeted me with her usual warmth, but I could see concern in her eyes. She'd probably been thinking about our conversation the previous week, wondering if she should have tried harder to talk me out of the wire transfer. "Good morning, Glinda. I have all the co-signature paperwork ready for you. This is exciting, helping Marcus buy his first home. You must be so proud." I smiled, but it felt like glass breaking. "Margaret, before we start, I need to understand something. What exactly happens if I don't sign these papers today?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, without a cosigner, Marcus won't qualify for the mortgage. The house purchase would fall through, and the sellers would keep the earnest money, which I believe was $5,000. The down payment you transferred would be returned to Marcus's account, but he'd lose the house and the earnest money." $5,000 of earnest money. Marcus had put down $5,000 of the money I'd given him to hold the house money that would disappear if the purchase fell through. I wondered if he'd considered that risk when he'd sent me that cruel text message. "And what did Marcus tell you about my willingness to co-sign?" I asked. Margaret looked uncomfortable. "He said his mother was enthusiastically supportive of the purchase and that the co-signature was just a formality. He seemed very confident you'd be here today." Enthusiastically supportive, after cutting me out of his life and stealing credit for my sacrifice. After using my money to fund an engagement I'd learned about through a wedding invitation. After treating me like an ATM rather than the woman who'd raised him single-handedly for 10 years. Margaret, I've changed my mind. I won't be co-signing this mortgage today. The words hung in the air between us like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Margaret's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, concern, professional neutrality, and something that might have been admiration. Glenda, are you sure this is a big decision? Once the deadline passes, the entire deal falls apart. I'm absolutely sure. Can you call Marcus and let him know the co-signature has been declined? Margaret nodded and picked up the phone. I listened as she was transferred between departments, finally reaching someone who could contact Marcus directly. The conversation was brief and professional, but I could hear the shock in the loan officer's voice when Margaret explained the situation. After she hung up, Margaret looked at me with something approaching respect. He asked to speak with you directly. I told them you'd declined and left it at that. Glenda, can I ask what changed your mind? I thought about how to answer that question. How do you explain that your son broke your heart and then ground the pieces under his heel? How do you describe the moment you realize you've raised someone who sees you as a resource rather than a person? Let's just say I discovered that unconditional love shouldn't mean unconditional enabling, I said, finally. My phone rang before I made it to the parking lot. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I'd started this confrontation and I intended to finish it. Mom, what the hell is going on? The bank just called and said you refused to co-sign the mortgage. There has to be some mistake. His voice was frantic, desperate, completely different from the dismissive tone he'd used the last time we'd spoken. Suddenly, he needed me again. Suddenly, I was important enough for a phone call. No mistake, Marcus. I decided not to co-sign the mortgage. But why? You said you wanted to help me buy a house. You gave me the down payment. Why would you back out now? The audacity of the question took my breath away. Why would I back out, Marcus? You sent me a text message telling me I wasn't welcome on a trip I'd been planning for 2 years. You've been telling people you have a trust fund instead of crediting my sacrifice. You got engaged without telling me, and I found out through a wedding invitation. And you're asking me why I changed my mind about co-signing a mortgage. There was silence on the other end of the line. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller. Mom, I can explain all of that. I'm listening. The Europe trip thing, that was Jessica's idea. She thought it would be weird having my mom along on what's supposed to be a romantic getaway, and the engagement we wanted to keep it quiet until after the trip. The wedding invitation was Jessica's mom's idea. She handles all their social stuff. Every explanation was someone else's fault. Jessica's idea. Jessica's mom's plan. Jessica's influence. My son had apparently lost the ability to make his own decisions or take responsibility for his own actions. And the trust fund story, I asked. Another pause. I never said I had a trust fund. Maybe people misunderstood when I talked about family support. He was lying. I could hear it in his voice, the same tone he'd used as a child when he got caught breaking something and tried to blame the dog. But he was 22 years old now, and the stakes were much higher than a broken vase. Marcus listened to me very carefully. I've spent the last 10 years putting your needs before my own, your happiness before my own, your future before my own. I emptied my emergency fund to help you buy a house, and you responded by cutting me out of your life and taking credit for my sacrifice. Mom, that's not what happened. Let me finish. You have a choice to make. You can continue down this path, treating me like a bank account, with legs making excuses for your selfishness, and letting your girlfriend dictate how you treat your family. Or you can start acting like the man I raised you to be. But I'm done enabling the boy you've chosen to become. What does that mean? It means the house deal falls through without my co-signature. It means you lose the earnest money and have to explain to Jessica why your financial independence just evaporated. It means you need to decide what's more important, my respect or her approval." The line went quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was hard, angry, nothing like the panicked tone from moments before. "You know what, Mom? Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe you are controlling and manipulative. Maybe I don't need this kind of drama in my life. I'm an adult, and I can figure out my own housing situation without help from someone who's trying to control me with money." Those words hit me like a physical blow, but they also crystallized something important. This wasn't a confused young man making mistakes. This was someone who'd rather blame his mother than take responsibility for his own choices. Someone who'd rather sacrifice our relationship than admit he'd been wrong. Then that's your choice, Marcus. When you're ready to have a conversation based on mutual respect instead of financial convenience, you know where to find me. I hung up the phone and sat in my car in the bank parking lot, shaking with adrenaline and heartbreak, and something that might have been relief. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up to the entitled stranger my son had become. Whether it would save him or lose him forever remained to be seen. What I knew for certain was that I couldn't continue being the kind of mother who raised the kind of man who could treat any woman the way Marcus had treated me. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling wrapped in good intentions. The next few days would determine whether my son was capable of learning that lesson, or whether I'd have to learn to live without him in my life. Either way, I'd finally remembered who I was before I became someone else's solution to every problem. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was chaos in Marcus's life and strangely peaceful in mine. Within hours, I received a series of increasingly frantic text messages as the reality of his situation became clear. The house deal collapsed by Wednesday. The earnest money was forfeit. Jessica's reaction, based on the bitter tone of his messages, was apparently explosive. But what surprised me most was my own reaction. Instead of the guilt and regret I expected to feel, I experienced something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. For the first time since Marcus was born, I wasn't responsible for fixing his problems or funding his dreams. He'd made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. Thursday brought a call from Jessica herself, her voice shrill with indignation. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you've ruined everything. Marcus is devastated. How could you do this to your own son?" The irony of being lectured about family loyalty by the girl who'd convinced my son to exclude me from his life wasn't lost on me. "Jessica, this conversation is between Marcus and me. When he's ready to discuss this like an adult without intermediaries, I'll be here." "You're making a huge mistake," she said before hanging up. "Marcus doesn't need people like you in his life. People like me, the woman who'd raised him, supported him, sacrificed for him, and loved him unconditionally until he taught me that unconditional love was just another form of abuse." Jessica was right about one thing: Marcus didn't need people like me in his life. He needed to learn he couldn't survive without them. Friday brought news through the neighborhood grapevine that Jessica had moved out of Marcus's apartment. Mrs. Patterson from his complex mentioned it casually when I ran into her at the grocery store, probably not realizing the significance of the information. "Oh, your son's girlfriend moved out yesterday," she said. "Quite a lot of yelling and crying in the parking lot. These young relationships, they burn so hot and fast, don't they?" I expressed appropriate concern while internally noting that Jessica's commitment to Marcus had lasted exactly as long as his apparent financial stability. When the luxury lifestyle evaporated, so did she. I wondered if Marcus was beginning to understand the difference between someone who loved him and someone who loved what he could provide. The Europe trip, according to social media posts I couldn't help checking, was canceled. Jessica's Instagram went from excited countdown posts to cryptic messages about toxic people and knowing your worth. Marcus's social media went silent completely. 6 months later, I got a phone call that changed everything between us forever. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was reading in my living room when the phone rang. Marcus's name on the caller ID still made my heart skip even after all this time. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mom!" His voice was different, quieter, older, stripped of the arrogance that had characterized our last conversation. "Hello, Marcus." "Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been working 2 jobs since the house deal fell through. I'm living in a studio apartment across town, and I'm paying my own bills for the first time in my life." I waited, not trusting myself to speak. "And I've been thinking about everything that happened, about the things I said to you, about how I treated you, after everything you'd done for me." His voice cracked slightly. "Mom, I was wrong. About everything. I was selfish and entitled and cruel, and I'm so sorry." The apology I'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement I'd needed, finally came. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of something new, something that had to be built carefully from the ground up. "I appreciate you saying that, Marcus. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know I hurt you badly, but I want you to know that I understand now what Jessica was, what I was becoming because of her influence. I understand that you weren't trying to control me. You were trying to save me from becoming someone I wouldn't be able to live with." We talked for 2 hours that night, really talked for the first time in years. Marcus told me about the months after Jessica left, about learning to budget and grocery shop and pay rent with money he'd earned himself. He told me about the satisfaction of working for something instead of expecting it to be given to him. He told me he'd started therapy to understand how he'd become so entitled, so willing to hurt the person who loved him most. He told me he'd realized that real independence meant taking responsibility for his choices, not just having the financial means to avoid consequences. Most importantly, he told me he was proud to be my son, proud of the sacrifices I'd made, proud of the woman who'd raised him even when he'd been too blind to appreciate her. The rebuilding of our relationship was slow and careful. Marcus had to prove through actions, not just words, that he'd genuinely changed. I had to learn to trust again, to believe that my son could become the man I'd always hoped he'd be. It took time, but gradually we found our way back to each other. Not as mother and dependent child, but as 2 adults who loved and respected each other. Marcus never asked me for money again, but more importantly, I never felt the need to use money to buy his attention or affection. The house that started everything was eventually bought by another young couple, probably with help from parents who didn't require the hard lessons Marcus had to learn. Sometimes I drive by it and wonder what would have happened if I'd signed those papers, if I'd continued enabling his selfishness in the name of love. I know now that the greatest gift I ever gave my son wasn't the money I offered or the sacrifices I made. It was the boundary I finally set, the moment I chose to love him enough to let him fail, to let him learn, to let him become the man he was capable of being, instead of the boy I'd been protecting him from becoming. The Europe trip happened eventually 3 years later, when Marcus had saved his own money and planned his own adventure. He invited me to join him, and this time, the invitation came from love and respect, not obligation or manipulation. We spent 2 weeks exploring the museums and cafes I'd dreamed about, but the real destination was the relationship we'd rebuilt from the ashes of the old one. People often ask me if I regret taking such a hard stand, if I think there might have been an easier way to teach Marcus the lessons he needed to learn. The answer is always the same. Love isn't always gentle, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses. I learned that being a good mother doesn't mean saying yes to everything your child wants. Sometimes it means having the courage to say no to what they want so they can discover what they actually need. Sometimes it means loving them enough to risk losing them, trusting that real love will survive the test, while superficial relationships will crumble under pressure. Marcus learned that respect can't be bought with gifts or guilt, that relationships require genuine reciprocity, and that the people who truly love you are the ones willing to hold you accountable when you lose your way. He learned the difference between being supported and being enabled, between being loved and being indulged. Most importantly, we both learned that family isn't about obligation or convenience or financial benefit. It's about choosing each other again and again, especially when that choice is difficult. It's about growing together instead of just growing older together. It's about building something real instead of just maintaining something comfortable. The text message that started this whole journey still lives in my phone, a reminder of how quickly love can turn to manipulation when boundaries disappear. But now it's joined by hundreds of other messages, ones filled with genuine affection, real respect, and the kind of love that doesn't come with conditions or expectations. That's the difference between the relationship we had and the relationship we built. The old one was based on what I could give and what he could take. The new one is based on who we are and who we choose to be for each other. And that makes all the difference in the world. So, to anyone watching this who recognizes themselves in my story, whether as the giver or the taker, I want you to know that it's never too late to change the dynamic. It's never too late to demand the respect you deserve or to start giving the respect you owe. Love isn't about keeping score, but it's also not about ignoring the scoreboard entirely. Real love requires courage. The courage to set boundaries, the courage to have difficult conversations, the courage to risk short-term pain for long-term healing. But when you find that courage, when you do the hard work of building genuine respect alongside genuine affection, you discover something beautiful. You discover that the people who truly belong in your life will rise to meet your standards, while the people who don't belong will eliminate themselves. And in the end, that's exactly what you want. A life filled with people who choose you, not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are when you're not doing anything for them at all. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love? How did it change your relationship? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about love, family, and finding the courage to demand the respect we all deserve. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. Choose wisely, love bravely, and never be afraid to stand up for your own worth. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly matter in your life.